Hey there, Christophe from the French Herbal. When you pick a bottle of herbal capsules in your favorite store, you need to know what's inside. It's obvious, right? Well, not that obvious based on what I'm hearing from herb lovers. If you open a capsule, you will see some kind of a powder. And you will be tempted to think that they're all the same, right? A powder is a powder. And it's just a plant, nothing else, nothing added, nothing transformed. Well, think again. In reality, there are two big types of preparations that can go inside a herbal capsule. The whole plant in powder or a dry concentrated extract. And you need to know which one you have in order to use the product properly. So that's the purpose of this episode. We will look inside a herbal capsule and try to understand the different types of powders. Let's start with the simplest form, the whole herb ground into a powder. And this is precisely what it sounds like, right? Well, actually almost. A manufacturer will buy some bulk dried herbs from a supplier, whether it's leaves, flowers, roots, barks, or seeds, and they will grind it into a fine powder. And this powder will be put into a capsule shell. You have different sizes of shells, starting with 000, which is the largest one, very big and not very common. Then 00, which is already big. Then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 being the smallest, quite tiny actually. 00 and 0 are the most common for herbal supplements. There's a whole discussion around what the shell is made of, whether it's gelatin, animal derived, plant-based shells are made from HPMC or other semi-natural, semi-synthetic compounds, more suitable for vegetarians or vegans, obviously. Sometimes they contain other ingredients like coloring agents. The white capsules, the white shells often contain titanium dioxide, which is not that great to absorb. So anyway, there's a whole debate here, which I will not cover because today I just want to explain what goes inside this empty shell. So the manufacturer will select the size and the type of shell, then fill it with the plant powder. And the herb is in its simplest form, if you will, just cut into very tiny bits to make it more convenient to swallow and absorb. And you can make these types of capsules yourself at home. You can buy kits to fill your empty shells, and a simple coffee grinder will do the trick to grind the herbs. You will have to sift the powder using a sieve, and then you keep the fine powder to fill the capsules, and what's left in the sieve, the largest parts, that goes back into the grinder for another spin. There are actually good reasons to choose whole herb powders in the capsules. First of all, in theory, you know exactly what you're getting, right? It's the whole plant, nothing added, no complicated transformation. That is, if the manufacturer has not cheated, which unfortunately can happen in the world of supplements, especially if the supply chain is complicated with lots of suppliers selling to intermediaries, selling to other suppliers, etc. And not sure what the situation is in your country, but here in France, we can find more and more growers that grow the plant, then they do the transformation for us. And they mostly do tinctures, infused oils and salves and tea blends, but sometimes they do capsules. And when they do, well, the traceability is very straightforward, right? From the seed to the capsule, they do it all, which is good. But then the more players you add in the supply chain, the more opportunity to cheat. And I'm not just making this up. We have lots of studies showing adulteration of herbal products. One study shows that 27% of all herbal products are adulterated, almost a third, which is pretty outrageous. And it goes up to more than 37% for weight loss supplements. And listen to this, 61% for sexual enhancers for males, which are sometimes spiked with Viagra. Crazy, right? All references are on my website as usual. What happens too is that not the best looking parts of the plant will go into the grinder. In France, we have this expression, we say the bottom of the bag. You see what I mean? Right? So imagine a big bag of beautiful, feverfew flowers. You will sell the best parts for a good price. Then, when the bag is almost empty, you end up with the debris, small pieces of stems and little bits that do not belong there, and a bit of soil maybe. And well, the bottom of the bag is a perfect candidate to go into the grinder if you are a supplier that does not care very much about quality and ethics, of course. But hey, it will be cheaper. One last point, manufacturers will often add anti-clumping agents like magnesium stearate, bulking agents, sometimes like rice bran, etc., which is not ideal, but that's the way it goes. Anyway, so let's simplify for the sake of this argument and assume that what's written on the label is accurate, that the powder has not been spiked, that the supplier did not use just the bottom of the bag, just the whole plant ground into a powder. And so you buy a bottle of those capsules, let's assume. At this stage, I encourage you to open up the capsule. You empty it, you wet your finger, you get some of the powder on your finger and you taste it. Check whether the powder tastes like the actual plant. And how do you know what the herb tastes like? Well, if you're serious about herbalism, you will have to build your own library of tastes. If you buy a capsule of valerian root powder, for instance, it should taste and smell like valerian roots. And how do you know what it tastes and smells like? Well, maybe you have bought a good valerian tincture made from the fresh roots directly from a grower that you trust, and you have trained your taste buds on that. So then you can check the capsule. In my experience, the quality of whole herb capsules varies a lot. And let me tell you, I have tasted many herbal capsules, everything I could get my hands on during my first years of practice. And my clients would sometimes bring me their capsule bottle. And so I would open one in front of them and taste it. And it could be fine, or I could say, well, no wonder why this product is not helping you for your problematic. It tastes like nothing, right? Now, a crucial point, here is where whole herb powders actually have a real limitation. Not all herbs tolerate being dried and powdered. Some herbs are used specifically for their aromatic compounds. They're volatile oils, right? And those essential oils, they will give the plant their flavor, their smell, and some of their therapeutic action. Think about fresh mint, right? When you crush fresh mint leaves in your hands, you smell that remarkable minty aroma, right? Those are volatile essential oils. Now, when you dry that mint and grind it into a powder, something happens. Many of those aromatic compounds evaporate. They're very volatile, meaning they literally float away during the grinding process. If it gets to your nose, it is not in the plant anymore, right? So the powder still has some benefits, but you have lost a significant part of what made that herb special, and you lost that during grinding. And then, since the herb has been cut so small, there will be a much larger surface of the herb that is in contact with the air, with oxidative stress. So the powder will age much quicker than the whole uncut herb, and that's a shame. So this is true for many herbs like thyme, oregano, rosemary, basil, lavender, peppermint, lemon balm, German chamomile, Roman chamomile, and countless other herbs. The drying and grinding process will damage those aromatic plants. Even plants like burdock or elecampane, the root is kind of aromatic for burdock. You smell something, right? And very aromatic for elecampane. And I don't like to see ground and powdered versions of those herbs. I think that's a shame. Again, the whole herb capsule will retain some benefits, but not all of them. Let me take a bit of a tangent here. I love Tulsi, also called holy basil, and I have grown many types in the garden. I love the fragrance. I love to prepare myself a tea. And they all have different aromatic profile. And at some point, I heard about manufacturers that were selling ground powdered Tulsi, and I thought, what? No way, what a shame. But I'm a very curious guy, so I bought samples from 2 labs that I know well and that specialize in Ayurvedic plants. And actually, I was very pleasantly surprised because that powder was quite aromatic, but still nothing compared to a fresh plant tincture or even a tea made from the recently dried, uncrushed leaves. So as a rule, if the herb is aromatic or fragile or doesn't tolerate drying well, then no grinding and no whole herb powder capsules. Well, at least that is my rule. And one last point about this first type of capsules. Whole herb powder capsules are generally less expensive than concentrated extracts because the manufacturing process is more straightforward, right? So you're not paying for the cost of extraction and concentration. A quick pause to let you know that you can grab my free ebook on preparing herbal teas for the 4 seasons. It's full of simple recipes and blends you can make with herbs you can buy or even grow almost anywhere. The link is right below this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, now let's talk about the second big type of powder that you can find in a capsule. We call it a concentrated dry extract. And this is where things get a little more sophisticated. To make that extract, the first step is to do an extraction using a solvent. Usually the solvent could be water, could be alcohol, or both, or something else. So the starting point is actually some kind of a strong tea or tincture. And then the liquid will be evaporated, usually in a vacuum, to make sure that the aromatics are not lost. And you end up with a very fine powder, which will be put in capsules. And there will be other ingredients too, to prevent that fine powder from becoming chunks. This powder, the dry extract, is a lot more concentrated than the whole plant. And the lab is supposed to give you the concentration, right? 5:1 or 8:1 or 10:1, depending on the product. For example, if you see 4:1 at the back of the capsule bottle, that means 1 gram of this concentrated extract is equivalent to 4 grams of the dried plant. If you see 10:1, then 1 gram of the extract is equivalent to 10 times, so 10 grams of the dried plant. You need this information to know what type of dosage you will use. Should you take 1 or 2 or 3 capsules once or twice a day? Well, it depends. Very often, we end up following the instructions on the label. But over here in France, the recommended dosage on the label is often a little too low because the labs are very cautious and they're following the European labeling rules, which are also very precautionary. To know how to dose your capsule, you first need a good reference book written by experienced practitioners. For instance, the outstanding reference book, it's pretty heavy, from Simon Mills and Kerry Bone, called Principles and Practice of Phytotherapy. So, for instance, I will go to the Valerian monograph. There it is. And I see 3 to 9 grams a day of the dried root or rhizome. So yes, I know it's a wide range, but we herbalists, we need those ranges because we could work with chronic, mild conditions or actually acute conditions, right? Now, let's assume that I buy a dried concentrated extract of valerian that is 6:1 in concentration. So my dosage bracket now becomes 0.5 to 1.5 of the dry extract, right? I just divided the numbers by 6. So far, so good. You follow me? Now, let's assume that each capsule contains 250 milligrams of the extract. This means 2 to 6 capsules per day, depending on the situation. Of course, you would always start with the lowest dosage, but you would allow for experimentation with the higher range if necessary. Again, based on solid reference books like Meals and Bone. Now, I doubt the lab will write that type of dosage on the label. Again, they're very cautious, and it's very often something like 1 to 2 capsules a day, or sometimes 1 to 2 capsules 1 to twice a day. In France, as I told you, very often the product is dosed too low for a certain situation, right? Based on the calculation I showed you. Okay, so that makes sense. You need to know the concentration to be able to dose the product well. Now, let's make things a little more complicated. Let's talk about standardization of an active compound in the product. So here's the key idea. Plants contain thousands of compounds, and not all of them are equally active. A standardized dry extract will guarantee the dose of one specific compound in the product. Why do manufacturers do this? Well, because number one, it's the idea that the plant is equal to its most active constituent. Sometimes it makes sense, but most of the time it does not, because plants are whole beings with a whole collection of constituents. All constituents are interesting. And there is a synergy effect. And this is not just new agey stuff. We have some research that could show synergies of constituents in particular herbs. So, and number two, because some practitioners, particularly those trained in the medical pharmacy field, they are used to precise dosing of one molecule, right? But we don't have that in the herbal world. Herbs are not prescription drugs. A tincture of Echinacea pallida roots from a plant that I grow in my garden here in the south of France will be kind of different from a tincture from the same species of Echinacea, but growing in the wild plains of Iowa. But it will also be kind of similar. So we will taste both, and we will recognize that typical signature of Echinacea that tells us, yeah, good for us, traditional herbalists. But in the modern optics of pharmacological practice, not good enough, because it does not allow you to dose in a predictable, repeatable way. So in my practice, I have used standardized dry extract when I knew that one particular constituent is very active. In the case of milk thistle, for instance, we know that silymarin is very active. And just to be clear, silymarin is actually a collection of constituents, not just one. But anyway, extracts standardized on silymarin from reputable manufacturers work fine in my experience. And how do I know that? Because I have seen the results. So, I have used those when convenient. But for most other cases, it's very reductionist. So, I'm sorry, ashwagandha is not just withanolides, rhodiola is not just rosavins, St. John's wort is not just hypericin. It's too simplistic. The herbal world is a lot more sophisticated than this. And again, this induced cheating, like manufacturers adding the extracted constituent just to spike it a little more and make the label look a little better to the consumer. So, all right. So to conclude, let me tell you what I do in my work as a clinical herbalist. And I'm not saying it's the best way. I'm just saying it's one way that makes sense to me. Okay. I am okay with herbal capsules. I have used them with clients that do not have the time or the patience to prepare a herbal tea. Maybe they do not want the alcohol in the tincture, or maybe they're already overwhelmed with their life. They travel a lot and they prefer capsules. And so, I don't judge. It's a starting point. Sometimes we have to start small. And we practitioners, we do our best to really adjust to our clients. But my goal is always to slowly take them to a world of herbal tea blends, of good tinctures, syrups, and salves, things with taste and color. But you need to start somewhere. I do not like concentrated dry extract because I have attended conferences where independent labs have analyzed a whole range of those products, including from known manufacturers, actually. And a lot of them are of poor quality because they buy from a supplier who buys from a supplier who buys from a supplier, very complex traceability. And just to be clear, the lab is not trying to cheat us directly necessarily, but they're competing on prices. And they sometimes buy from the cheapest suppliers. That's a problem. Once in a while, I have a client who comes with a bottle of capsules containing a concentrated dry extract. And they tell me, hey, I already bought those and have a limited budget. So if the herb makes sense and I know the lab, I'm okay with that. I look at the concentration ratio, I do my calculation, and I try to recommend a dosage that will work for that person in her or his situation. But most of the time I will go with whole herb capsules made from local growers, ideally. Right? If I need a particular plant that my local suppliers do not carry, I may try another manufacturer and I will buy a sample and I will taste them myself to get an idea of the overall quality. And that may sound simplistic because I do not have a chromatograph in my mouth or in my nose, but it's the best I have. And by now I trust my senses, and I think you can do the same. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you found that discussion useful. If yes, do let me know. And if not, please let me know what type of subject in the herbal world you would like me to cover. Thanks for being here. I will see you soon for another episode of The French Herbal.